what's going on here. All right, we are live on YouTube. Excellent. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we are live. Hey there, students. We are back with another Corona class for AP Euro. The focus of this class is going to be on the scientific revolution. So the questions today should either be focused on the scientific revolution or they should be focused on general exam kind of questions, which I'm always willing to answer. So with that, just note that Corona class sessions for AP European History will be on Mondays and Wednesdays at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Okay, so Mondays and Wednesdays at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern. And then we are also going, those are going to be available on my YouTube channel where they're all going to co-stream from now on. Okay, so as far as that goes, we are streaming on YouTube as well. But if you want to interact with me, the best place to interact with me is going to be on Crowdcast, crowdcast.io/Tom Ritchie. Okay, so as far as that goes, Megan, you're asking me, we've got a lot of questions about people. Now, as far as the time this week, I'm going to do 1 o'clock p.m. For the Corona class, but we may change that later on, okay? But this week we are 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern, and we will possibly look at some other times, but keep in mind there are also other times that I'll be broadcasting here and at Marco Learning. Now, one thing I want to note here, because I am going to be broadcasting sometimes at Marco Learning, and there is a beautiful video series that we've put out. Let's go ahead and go to youtube.com/Marco Learning. It's good to hear from you. Yeah, you too. So really. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the scientific revolution. Okay, so going into that, yeah, for some of y'all it is a holiday, and I'm broadcasting on a holiday, and you know, but that's all up to y'all, right? So with that, let's go ahead and get into the scientific revolution. A lot of y'all have some things about people, okay? Y'all want to start off with people. Now, the first thing that we've got to do here when we're thinking about people is we want to think about, first of all, the ancient authorities, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and put something up on the screen here because people get this confused more than anything else. Okay, there are three people that you really need to be familiar with as far as Kaylee, I tell you what, language now, language. So with that, let's go ahead and get into, let's see, I want to share my screen and let's talk about the first three people that we need to know here. So the first three people that we need to know are people who are from ancient Greece and Rome. Now, remember, when we're contextualizing the scientific revolution, we want to think about this in the context of the Renaissance and with humanism. And remember that, like, the Greeks and the Romans were the most awesome people that ever lived. And yeah, so with that, Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Galen. Now, it's a written test or a type test or whatever we want to call it. So if you want to call it Ptolemy, whatever, okay? But as far as that goes, it's not one of those AP language tests where you got to say it right. But Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Galen. So these are the big three when we're thinking about, like, what were the prevailing ideas? Now, the simple way to look at the scientific revolution, if we're trying to make a three, is that Galileo is challenging the church. But really, when it comes down to it, even though the church has some biblical concepts that it's got to defend, it's really these ancient authorities that are being challenged by Aristotle, when we think about Galileo, Copernicus, Vesalius, and William Harvey. Now, these are four down here at the bottom that I would think are very important. Don't try to learn every single person that was even remotely affiliated with the scientific revolution. I think that if you're looking at Copernicus, Galileo, Vesalius, William Harvey, Isaac Newton, we could add Isaac Newton there, Rene Descartes. I would say that those should be enough. Okay, there are others out there, but I wouldn't get too deep into that. So Aristotle was the expert in physics, astronomy, and of course logic. Now, Aristotle's logic is still something that is current. We've just kind of added to it. So when we think about deductive reasoning, like, we still use Aristotle's deductive reasoning, which starts off with premises and leads to a conclusion. Okay, so it starts off with premises and leads to a conclusion. And so when we're going from there, when we start off with these premises, for example, I could still say today, I could say that good students pass exams. Nana is a good student. Ergo, therefore, Nana will pass her exam, okay? And Nana, it's a written test, okay? Nana, Nana, whatever it is, okay? So with that, we see here that, you know, this deductive reasoning, we still use this. Now, the way that deductive reasoning works, though, is if Nana does not, okay, we got some stuff here with the coronavirus. All right, we're learning Euro, people. So wash your hands. And with that, when we think about, I might tell you, my baby Yoda mask is still, I think, I didn't realize I was ordering it from China. I'm really frustrated about it. So with that, when we think about deductive reasoning, that comes from Aristotle. We still use it because think about Descartes. I think, therefore I am. What thinks must exist? I am thinking, therefore I must exist. So that is not necessarily gone. But now Aristotle, also Aristotle's rhetoric, Aristotle's politics, there are a lot of things about Aristotle that are still current. His physics and astronomy are not. Okay, Aristotle's physics and Aristotle's astronomy, okay, not a thing anymore. So when we think about physics, what Aristotle said about physics was that a heavier object falls faster than a lighter object. Okay, so when we think about what Aristotle taught about this, and it makes sense if you think about it. Like if I'm thinking in terms of, oh, you can't, oh, okay, the screen. Okay, got it. Was I like the big screen and the stuff with the small screen? Okay, so let me see what happens in a bit next time I share my screen. Okay, we'll look at it. We'll look at it. Okay, so with that, I'll put it back up there. I'll put it back up. I just noticed, okay? So with that, when Aristotle said a heavier object falls faster than a lighter object. And when we think about it, if I'm dropping a brick and a sponge, that brick is going to hit the ground before the sponge does, okay? So it makes sense. It makes sense. Your name is Kofi. Okay, so as far as that goes, it's Kofi. So Kofi, hopefully you're a good student, you pass your exam. Now, what Galileo did on the Leaning Tower of Pisa, Galileo went to the Leaning Tower of Pisa and he dropped a musket ball and a cannonball. So it's like I've got two things that are made of the same thing and have the same kind of surface. Yes, I know it's COVID from Insta. I tell you what, I put on my Instagram story. Speaking of, if anybody follows me on Instagram, you will get a shout out, okay, or at least if it's enough for me to manage. But let's go ahead and get those Instagram follows out there. We see David, Maya, Owen, and Anna Sanders. All of you have followed me on Instagram. Thank you very much. So with that, of course, I think maybe only David is actually here. But with that, yes, COVID on Instagram. I put on my Instagram story, I was reading Ovid. I was reading a book by Ovid, but then I noticed like you put a C in front of Ovid and it's like COVID, you know, and I'm just like, I can never unsee that. So here's the thing. Galileo disproved Aristotle when it comes to physics, not only by establishing that heavy objects and light objects fall at the same rate, but also that they accelerate due to gravity. Aristotle thought that they fall at a constant speed. So Galileo is pioneering acceleration due to gravity, okay? So as far as that goes, well, see, here's the thing, that before the scientific revolution, empiricism was not as important, okay? So empiricism, this idea that we establish truth based on what can be sensed, okay? What can be sensed, what can be seen, touched, smelled. That before this, if we think about the Middle Ages, and those of you in Crowdcast, I'm going to go ahead and share a scientific revolution, some notes that I did when I was working with a client not too long ago. Actually, yesterday I was working with a client. If Felix is watching out there, I'm just going to share some notes from yesterday's session. So with that, I'm not going to share them now. I'll share them at the end of the broadcast, but I'll actually put them on screen, okay? Because let's go into how people thought. And with this, I need to make sure this time that I have the screen actually as the bigger thing here. So let's try screen sharing again. Okay, so let's see how Richie's going to do here on the screen sharing 101. All right, so let's see here. We're going to share the screen again. We're going to share the screen. Did we just, oh, we didn't share the screen. Okay, now we're sharing the screen. All right, I'm getting a little rusty. I've been spending too much time writing new DBQs that there we go. All right. So going from there, Sabat's, okay, Kaylee, Emily, Mr. Frank, okay, so David, okay, and then Maya, y'all were already here. Okay, so excellent. Thank y'all. Okay, so I am screen sharing, and now I'm going to focus on the screen that is sharing, okay? So how about now? Are we good here on the ratios? Are we good here? Yay, it works. All right, people. So excellent. So going back, like thinking about how people thought. Now, medieval epistemology. Now, what is epistemology? Epistemology is a fancy word that talks about our theory of knowledge. Like, how do we determine what is true? Okay, so how do we measure truth? And how do we determine what's true and what's not? It's not the study of what's actually true. It's the study of how we arrive at truth. So you don't have to know the word epistemology for the AP Euro exam, but I'm just throwing that out there. If you don't like it, you can send it right back, okay? But medieval epistemology is based on largely theology and logic. When you think about scholasticism, this way of learning in medieval universities, that you arrived at truth through a combination of theology and logic. Now, it's not necessarily through the scientific method or empiricism, okay? So when we think about logic, we're thinking about, rationality. Just like when you think about Aristotle, okay, so maybe he didn't go and test his theory that heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects, but it makes sense logically, okay? So theology, the teachings of the church as found in the Bible and in Catholic doctrine. And then logic, medieval universities taught Aristotle's logic, which was based on deductive reasoning. This whole idea that good students pass exams. Kofi is a good student. Therefore, ergo, Kofi will pass his exam. Now, if Kofi doesn't pass his exam, then my process of deduction wasn't logical. So either Kofi's not a good student or good students don't always pass exams. And so Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, which he wrote in the 13th century, was based primarily on scripture and Catholic teaching, but also incorporated the ideas of Aristotle and other philosophers. Now, if we go into how is the scientific revolution affecting epistemology, what you start to see here is during the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, we start to see empiricism and rationalism. Now, note that empiricism represents discontinuity or change in the way that people are thinking. Now, continuity, when you see that logic is still a thing. So, for example, Francis Bacon and John Locke were empiricists. All right, empiricism means that we are coming to truth. We are collecting evidence through sensory observation and experience. Okay, so what is seen, what is touched, what is smelled, etc. Whereas rationalism, that's using logical thought processes to construct truth. Now, inductive reasoning, this is something that's new. This is something that Francis Bacon. Now, there's another person that we might want to know in terms of associating him with inductive reasoning. So, inductive reasoning. Now, I've got a video on inductive and deductive reasoning that you might find useful. I would say you definitely find useful, right? But it's POV me. So going into inductive and deductive reasoning, let me see here where I've got that. I've got that somewhere, I swear. All right, deductive and inductive reasoning. Okay, so just to note here, now again, deductive reasoning, that goes all the way back to Aristotle, and it's something that we continue to use today. Now, when we look at deductive reasoning, that's what we're doing here. Now, inductive, Descartes, again, Descartes' a rationalist, okay? Descartes was not an empiricist. Descartes says, look, your senses can play tricks on you. So with that, cogito ergo sum, which my new Instagram followers, somebody can't follow me on Instagram without first existing. Okay, so Clay Smith, we know that you exist. Okay, because what exists must if someone follows me on Instagram, they must exist, right? And so therefore what follows on Instagram must exist. Clay Smith follows me on Instagram, ergo Clay exists. Okay, so congratulations, Clay Smith, you have received proof of your existence. And that's inductive that is deductive reasoning. Okay, now when we go to inductive reasoning, inductive reasoning makes use of empirical evidence, and it starts with observation. So when you think about this, the inductive reasoning, so when you look here, what is this? Okay, your first response is to say a triangle, but then you need to think about, nope, we need more data, because what we could see here, it could be a triangle, but it also could be a circle. Now, when you start doing this, okay, that cannot be a circle. Okay, it could be a triangle, or it could be some kind of bizarre shape with a whole bunch of sides, right? But we see here that there is a greater probability of the conclusion being true the more data you have. So when we look at inductive reasoning is much more focused on the collection of data. Okay, so with that, inductive reasoning with the collection of data, that's something that that we see there. Now, so with this, we're going to see that that cannot be a circle. So going through that, that's inductive versus deductive reasoning. Now remember, we still use deductive reasoning today. So rationalism is a continuity from the Middle Ages, and deductive reasoning, Descartes, that represents a continuity in the way that we're arriving at truth. Now what's happening here, though, is empiricism is largely replacing traditional thinking and theology. Okay, so when we think about that, theology and traditional thinking, we're replacing that. That when you look at modern scientific methods, that they don't incorporate. There's no, like in AP government, we see here that. Okay, it looks like your Trump check's on the way. Of course, y'all are probably not old enough to get one. So with that, empiricism, when people are like, why would Aristotle put these ideas out there that had not been tested? It wasn't about testing the ideas. That's something that's modern science. Now, one thing we want to note that religion didn't cease to be a factor in thinking about truth. That when we look at this, Bacon, Locke, Descartes, most of these people, Bacon, they were all like, when you think about this, if we go to Copernicus, okay, so Copernicus, who was actually a priest, okay, Copernicus, Galileo, Bacon, Locke, and Descartes were all devout practicing Christians. The scientific revolution did not do away with religion or religious thinking. It just lessened the roles of traditional teachings, including religious teachings, in formulating scientific truth. Now, where we go on to the Enlightenment, when we look forward here, okay, this is something that is important as we're moving forward, that Enlightenment philosophers in the 18th century would openly challenge the validity of religious teachings and attempt to apply scientific principles to society. So during the scientific revolution, we don't see an attempt to make these scientific principles applicable to society at large. Okay, so that's something that's important there. All right, so going from there, we want to understand how people's thinking is changing. And then we want to note who were the ancient authorities. So Aristotle, when it came to physics, astronomy, and logic. Now, also, when we look at Aristotle's astronomy, Aristotle, his astronomy, he taught that the moon and the stars are made of some sort of fifth element, what he called ether, of a spiritual substance. Now, Galileo, with his telescope, he looks at the moon. There are craters on that moon. That's a physical substance. So that is another way that Galileo disproves Aristotle. Now, the biggest thing about astronomy was Ptolemy's geocentrism. Okay, Ptolemy's teaching that the Earth is at the center of the universe. Okay, the Earth is at the center of the universe, and of course, Copernicus and Galileo put heliocentric theory out there. So Ptolemy is, is canceled here. Now, then Galen is the one people always forget. Now, if you've seen the movie Rogue One, Galen Erso is the guy who developed the Death Star. Okay, so he's a character in Rogue One. I tend to encourage people, if you're into Star Wars, which I make a lot of Star Wars references. By the way, if anybody's seen that most recent Clone Wars episode, like, wow. Okay, but Galen was the expert on medicine. Okay, medicine and human anatomy, where Galen is the one who advocated the humoral theory of disease. So if you're sick, your humors are out of whack. Okay, now the people who come along after Galen, the people who are disproving Galen's theories, who are updating our understandings of science, this is something. What we're seeing here is that Vesalius. Now, for example, when we think about that, that Vesalius is dissecting human corpses. Now, remember that this was frowned upon. Okay, so with that, it was frowned upon. So with this, we think in terms of Vesalius is doing something that the Romans didn't like, the Christians didn't like, but it's giving us more accurate pictures of human anatomy because he's dissecting actual human cadavers. Now, William Harvey was the expert on circulation. Okay, so William Harvey was the expert on circulation. And when we think about this today, all right, when we think about this today, we're thinking in terms of like, this is still current. When you think about what's going on with, we think about what's going on with the coronavirus, for example. It's like, who are the people who are most susceptible? Who are the people who are most susceptible? And we think about this, people with hypertension. What is hypertension? Okay, when we're thinking about William Harvey, what is hypertension? That's high blood pressure. It means your blood's not able to circulate properly. So with that, your blood's not able to circulate properly, and that can be a problem. We see this today. Now, the biggest killer, we see that the coronavirus, it's something that, I think we've had about 40,000 deaths. But what is the biggest cause of death in the United States today? What kills 500,000 people? Okay, what kills 500,000 people every year is heart disease. Why is heart disease the biggest killer in the United States? Because you need the heart to circulate the blood. Okay, so you need the heart to circulate the blood. So William Harvey, who says that, look, the circulation of the blood is what is determining if somebody's healthy or not. That is one of the biggest things here, okay? So we see that William Harvey's work, that it's not that your humors are out of whack, it's that your blood's not circulating. So that's something that is extremely important. Okay, so as far as that, when we look at the major people we need to know for the scientific revolution, we're thinking in terms of my list. Okay, if we're thinking about the scientific revolution, who do you need to know? Okay, so let's just make a definitive list and go from there. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen again. And so let's go ahead and think about the definitive list. All right, so going ahead and making that screen bigger. Okay, so now y'all can actually see my screen. Let's see, let's go ahead and focus on this screen here. All right, so when we think about the key people, okay, so when we think about the key people that you have to know here, okay, so key people, you've got the ancient authorities. Okay, so let's go ahead and create like a little four-tiered table. Ancient authorities. Then we've got astronomy, physics, and medicine. Okay, so astronomy, physics, and medicine. So we've got here that we've got Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Galen. Astronomy, we're thinking about Copernicus and Galileo. Okay, physics, okay, Isaac Newton. Then, you know, in Galileo, because Galileo is relevant to astronomy and physics. Now, Isaac Newton may have a little bit when you're getting into that, but medicine, remember Vesalius. Now, you don't necessarily need to know all of these people, okay? So when you think about like that the format is essay, you really want to know a few of these people very well. So if you think about this, if you're like, you know what, I'm going to know Aristotle, Copernicus, and Galileo, and make sure that I know, you know, basically this relationship between the three of them, and Ptolemy. That may, but now one thing that you can see sometimes is on a DBQ, you may need to know a little more because some of this stuff's going to be in the documents and you don't know what you're going to use for outside evidence. So William Harvey, okay, we're going to make one more column here because then we now, and you can kind of go in where you think, and again, you don't need to necessarily know all of these people, but we want to note here, we're going to put a column there. So medicine, and then logic. Okay, so when we think about logic, you know, logic and mathematics. Okay, so you think about logic and mathematics, you've got Descartes, Bacon, and perhaps, you know, of course, Newton, when you're getting into logic and mathematics. So those are just, you know, making sure it's not just knowing who they are, but what was their contribution, and thinking about how you're going to prioritize. Okay, so for example, if you're thinking about medicine, if you're going to focus on Vesalius and William Harvey, you need to make sure that you are you need to make sure that Galen, okay, is somebody that you're familiar with. So make sure that whoever you're focusing on here, that you are also noting how they're updating understandings, okay? So as far as that goes, you know, we get into then, of course, wanting a deep knowledge, you know, so if we think about Galileo, you know, having a deep knowledge of this whole thing with Copernicus and Copernicus and Galileo. Now, there's one picture here. I'm going to put this, I want to make a meme about this, okay, because there's Galileo. You notice here that, you know, Galileo, he's got kind of that contrapposta stance going on there. But I think that what's important to note here is how would we applaud Galileo today? How would Galileo fit into our, you know, fit into our paradigm here? Okay, so if we think about like today, how Galileo would fit into today's paradigm, that we see that Galileo, let's give him a mask. Some people wear a mask all the time for their work, but Galileo probably isn't one of those people. So with that, let's think about this. Okay, so if we give Galileo a mask here, you know, we could say here, like our caption here is, you know, Galileo practices social distancing with the members of the Roman Inquisition. Okay, so you see here that Galileo, he's standing, you know, about 6 feet apart. You know, I think that when we look there, that Galileo is practicing social distancing there. So, you know, he should be applauded for his responsible behavior. I will, you know, so let me just make a little note here. Bring that to the front there. Yeah, so let's say Galileo. Y'all just excuse me for a second while I meme. All right. So with that, so yeah, so Galileo. All right, so that's with the Roman Inquisition. Okay, so that's what we see here. We've got a whole new way of interpreting this painting of Galileo with the Roman Inquisition. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get into some other things. So key people, I think that those are the College Board Inquisition. There you go. Nobody expects the College Board Inquisition. All right. So with that, okay, so oh my goodness, the worst is ahead of us in the coronavirus outbreak, according to the World Health Organization. I tell you, I'm getting like alarming headlines like constantly on my computer. All right. So as far as that goes, how do you recommend remembering? Okay, so the main thing, Megan, is making sure that your learning is meaningful, okay? That there should be meaningful learning here going on. And so with that, you want to make sure, like what I did with that chart there, that we're organizing, okay? So you think in terms of of organizing and what happens there. Okay, so you think about like that chart that I made there that we're thinking about who did what. Same thing with the Renaissance humanists, that you think in terms of you've got your Italian Renaissance humanists like Petrarch and Pico. Then you've got your civic humanists like Machiavelli and Castiglione. And then you've got your northern humanists like Thomas More and Erasmus. Can I share those notes? Yeah, I'll go ahead and share this with y'all. Let me go ahead and just make a little note there. Oh wow, somebody's already in here. I think somebody might have like this one person might have come in here and I don't know. They figured out what was going on. Maybe they read the URL or something like that. But yeah, for those of y'all in Crowdcast, I will go ahead and get that get that going here. So I'll go ahead and share that with y'all here. All right. So going for that. All right. So that's the main thing, is to organize them into groups and go from there. Don't just think I've got to throw all of these people into one pile. Okay. So with that, what is some good outside evidence for the scientific revolution? Now, here's the thing. What is some good outside evidence? It depends on what shows up in the documents. So, for example, like the College Board released a revised DBQ, the one from last year, which is talking about the Catholic Church and the scientific revolution. Now, outside evidence was very difficult on that one. Okay, outside evidence was very difficult there, and so because basically Copernicus shows up in the documents, and so Copernicus is out. So when you're thinking about a DBQ, what you've got to think about is the outside evidence really depends on what is in the document. So for the outside evidence for that one, I would focus most on like William Harvey. Yeah, I would focus on Vesalius. Vesalius is somebody, unless he shows up, great outside evidence. Also, Descartes showed up in this DBQ that was given last year. So basically, Copernicus and Descartes are out as far as outside evidence because they're in the documents. So with that going on, how are women's rights considered during the scientific revolution and enlightenment? Okay, so Andrew, the women's rights movement really starts at the time of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. That before you really get to like where Wollstonecraft publishes her vindication of the rights of woman, and then Olympe de Gouges, her declaration of the rights of woman and the female citizen. That's really something, you've got some, female scientists during the Enlightenment, such as, Voltaire's very close friend and one-time mistress, Emily du Châtelet. She was somebody who was educated. She came from an aristocratic family. We want to note that educational opportunities at this time weren't typically available to women. Like we don't really, when we're studying Renaissance humanists and prominent scientists during the scientific revolution, we're not going to see a lot of women. So feminism really starts at the time of the French Revolution and picks up into the 19th and 20th, 20th of January. Okay. So with that, all right. So how did understanding the natural world develop and change during the scientific revolution and enlightenment? So Andrea, however we're going to say that, it's a written test, or I guess this week or this year, technically a type test, right? So with that, our understanding of the natural world, the biggest thing is the introduction of empiricism. So when we're getting into the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, now that is another thing. Another person I'd add here is when you think about logic, you could even think about John Locke, which the tabula rasa theory. Okay, we think about the tabula rasa theory. That's something that John Locke brings in terms of empiricism. So as far as that goes, the understanding of the natural world, that we see that first of all, we see the introduction of empiricism, and second of all, this whole idea of the understanding not just of the natural world, but of the cosmos. Okay, when we think about what is the Earth's place in the universe. So one of the things, like, why did the church feel so threatened by heliocentrism? So when we think about this, why did the Catholic Church feel so threatened by heliocentrism? Well, the thing is, when we think about the Bible, here's something that we want to note here is that when we look at the Bible, there is a biblical cosmology, which nobody at that time really believed, but the biblical cosmology, let me show you a picture of this. That basically this is the Earth, and we're living in essentially a biodome. That there was a movie in the 1990s called Biodome with Pauly Shore, which think about something like the Hunger Games. That here's the Earth, now here is the underworld, which the Hebrews called Sheol, and then there is the sky, and we've got in the book of Genesis, you see the separation of the upper waters and the lower waters. And so when it rains, you've heard of opening the floodgates. So basically, when it rains, the floodgates are being opened up, and then it rains. The upper waters are coming down. So then the floodgates are closed and it doesn't rain. That's why when you think about praying for rain, we're praying for God to open up the floodgates. There's a drought because God up here in the heavens is not allowing the floodgates to open. And so then the sun and the moon basically travel, and the stars, they're all here below the firmament. This is how they saw things in the ancient Near East. And so, for example, in the Bible, here is a romantic painting, which you can see it's a romantic painting by the landscape here. We see what in the devil? All right. Okay, so we see a romantic painting, we see this beautiful landscape, and we also see the religious subject. Here is a painting, this is from the book of Joshua. Joshua, during the conquest of Canaan, So Joshua, during the conquest of Canaan, is leading the Israelites against these Canaanite kings. Okay, and so as far as that goes, we're looking at this thing here where Joshua is pursuing his enemies. Okay, and then the sun is going down. And of course, they didn't have night vision goggles and stuff like that. So Joshua asks the God of Israel, God, can you make the sun stand still for a little bit? Because I need to finish destroying my enemies who are also your enemies, because you and I are like this. All right. And so then God makes the sun stand still. Now, if you look at this view of the cosmos, and even if you're updating this, like, remember, these people believed in a spherical Earth. They believed that the sun was rotating around the Earth, not the other way around. That everything revolved around the Earth. Of course, Galileo made this, disproved this when he saw moons around Jupiter, that we see these moons revolving around Jupiter. And so therefore, it's not just the Earth that has stuff revolving around it. Now, if Joshua tells the sun to stand still, notice that for these people and their understanding of things, it's like, okay, the sun goes on its little path there. All God has to do is, sun, stand still. And there we go. Okay, so with that, we see this. All right, so going from there, this is their view of the cosmos. Now, when you think of that story with Joshua, when we start to think of heliocentrism, like the Earth is actually rotating around the sun, Joshua telling the sun to stand still, it's a very complicated process now, because basically the law of universal gravitation is going to have to be completely suspended. Okay, so, and then basically, like, everything pause, and then God will put a magnet in the middle of the Earth and put gravity there, and it's a complicated process. Now, could an all-powerful universal God do that sort of thing? Yes, but you can see where the church would feel a bit threatened by this new idea. Also, if we're not at the center of the universe. Okay, now, As far as the chat is going to be the chat. You should have a way to make me full screen so you don't have to look at the chat. Okay, so that's something to note there. So you don't have to look at the chat. The chat is really something that, and actually I just did that. I actually just closed the chat. I don't know how to reopen it. How do I reopen the chat? Anybody know? So I can go to view chat. So basically you press a little thing here. There's a little down button. I can minimize the chat. Shivam is here. Good to see you, Shivam. So I can minimize the chat here, and then I don't see it. So, you are able to control whether you see the chat. It's in the top right of the chat. There's a little down arrow, and you can do that. So as far as that goes, just make sure you understand the chat is the chat. And hopefully y'all are going to youtube.com/Marco Learning. A few of you have, more of you need to, because I'm going to be broadcasting from Marco Learning later on. So make sure that we're going to that you're looking at that. Make sure we're getting into this. Okay, so youtube.com/Marco Learning. I'm going to put that in the chats again. So make sure we're trying to we're going to be doing some kind of broadcast there. Now, so going from there, how did the scientific method come about? The scientific method was developed. You see that Bacon and, as far as that goes, Francis Bacon was a big advocate of inductive reasoning. Okay, so that's what we start to see. Now, when we go for a hypothesis, we're using a form of deductive reasoning. Like, if it's going to be this, then it's going to be this, and this is what I'm expecting. So your hypothesis is what you're expecting to happen. Now, then you go through all of this empirical evidence, and then you examine your empirical evidence, and that is induction, but then you have to go back, okay? Then you go back and you say that, okay, I'm going to have to check my premises. So the scientific method was developed by both Bacon and Descartes, kind of separately. Descartes focusing more on deductive reasoning, Bacon focusing more on inductive reasoning. But we do want to understand that the modern scientific method is a combination of inductive and deductive reasoning. Can we write our response? Okay, an exam-based question. Yes, according to the latest information that we have from the College Board, you can write your response in Word or Google Docs, and you can then you can then paste it into your DBQ. Okay, so as far as that goes, you can type it into Word or Docs and then move it into the College Board interface. I would make sure that by 45 minutes before that red timer starts blinking, that you have it there. So with that, yes, so we all now, James, Aristotle, in terms of that, Aristotle was pre-Christian. Okay, so Aristotle was alive about 300 years before Jesus, so he was not a Christian. But yes, we would say that the philosophers of the scientific revolution, they tended to be religious. Newton was something of a heretic, but he was still very, he spent a lot of time reading the Bible. Newton would be classified as a Christian heretic, whereas Galileo, Copernicus, Francis Bacon, Descartes, they were in good standing with their churches. Okay, so with that, now, I don't know if I would make this too much a Catholic or Protestant thing. I would get out of the Reformation for this. Now, I know that John Calvin, I saw in a DBQ one time that Calvin was saying that, look, the Bible, and that's, of course, the point of view of the Catholic Church today. John Calvin said the Bible was never put there with the intention of being a scientific manual. So that's something, but I wouldn't necessarily go into a divide between Catholics and Protestants. And we need to also note that Catholic leaders were not universally opposed to developments in science. So we don't want to look at the Catholic Church as monolithically opposed to science. That's something I think that is very important there. All right. So with that, I would not, Anna, I would not recommend using voice typing, because voice typing, you're going to have a lot of things that can potentially go wrong. I would learn to type and actually type it. That would be my advice. Am I wearing a Holy Roman Empire shirt? Close. This is an Austrian eagle. Okay, so yeah, my shirt has an Austrian eagle on it. And so, yeah, so it's kind of about the closest thing to a Holy Roman Empire shirt. So, but yes, this is the Austrian eagle that is on this shirt. I saw the shirt on the internet. I liked it. I bought it. All right. How would I recommend? Okay, so Storm, here is my advice for the complexity point. If you are asking for help on how to do it, forget it. Okay. One thing that we want to note here, if you'll go to my AP Euro DBQ page, okay, if you go to my AP Euro DBQ page, then I'm going to give y'all a link there. There is a link to Marco Learning's guide to the DBQ, and you want to make sure to take a look at that, because what we're doing here in terms of strategy, this stuff is very important. Okay, this stuff is very important. So Marco Learning, a few of y'all have gotten into that. Now I don't know, where did my YouTube co-stream go? Okay, so as far as that goes, hey, all right. So with that, somebody says, hey, all right, banana. Okay, so anybody watch Minions lately? I'm probably about due to watch Minions again, y'all. So with that, let's go ahead and go there, and you can see where, and actually the eagle, the hammer, it's not communist. Now there is a hammer and a sickle, but you see chains breaking here. Okay, so it's not communist. Okay, it's not communist, but it is something that maybe kind of, it's the right colors, isn't it? Okay, so going with that, do you think we can get a 5 without the complexity point? So let me go ahead and get into that. Okay, so the scientific revolution, roughly 1550 to 1700. That's what I would note. 1550 to 1700 would be my rough years for that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and share the screen again, and I'm going to show off this beautiful Marco Learning annotation guide. Okay, so I want y'all to be able to see this. And let's take a look here. So y'all are wanting to know, y'all have some questions about strategy. And what I'm going to do here, let's make this window bigger. All right. So questions about strategy. Now, Marco Learning, with John and I have come up with this strategy that we've got the 6-point, the 8-point, and the 10-point strategy. Now, we don't know where a 3, a 4, and a 5 are going to cut off. So I would urge, I don't see a scenario where 6 points does not pass. Okay, so what we want to focus on first: thesis, describe 2 documents, use 2 to support an argument. Now, actually use 3. Okay, my advice is to use 3. That way you can screw one up and you're still fine. So then 2 pieces of outside evidence, and do a POV plus for 1 document. If you have time left after that, do another POV plus, examine another document for POV. Then go back and do contextualization. Go back to the beginning. My advice is, even if you're planning to do contextualization, do it at the end. Okay, so from there, we see here 8 points. Okay, so we go from there that we've got that, and then support a document with an argument, 4 documents, complex understanding. Now, for most of you, this 10-point strategy, don't try it, Anakin. I have the high ground. Okay, think about Obi-Wan Kenobi and just do not. Okay, do not. It's something that you could conceivably get a 5 with an 8. Now, I don't see a scenario where an 8 is not at least a 4, but the main thing here is a 5 is really about ego, and unless you have tried this multiple times and you've made it work in 45 minutes, I would not try to get all 10 points. I would get the 6 points. I would then get points 7 and 8. Then I would put in an extra document if you have time. I also don't see where you would need all 10 points. Okay, so what we've done here is we've taken this and we've got a hierarchy. So do this first, then add that, and add that. Now, if you want to set yourself up for complex understanding, I do talk about that in some sessions and with some of my tutoring clients especially, but generally, I'm not recommending this because of the limited amount of time. that, you know, when you're trying to use all the documents, all that kind of stuff, a lot of people are going to run out of time. What I'm noticing is when people try to score too many points, they're leaving other points on the table. So the most important thing here, I think, is to follow this strategy. 6 points, and then add these points as you go. Don't intentionally try to get complex understanding, because I really don't see a scenario where it's necessary for even a 5. So I would think that, okay, my guess is 5 to 6 will be a 3. 7 to 8 will be a 4. 9 to 10 will be a 5. Now, it could move down from there a little bit. We may never know. I'm not sure. But as far as that goes, the 6-point strategy is sure to get you a 3. The 8-point strategy is sure to get you a 4 by the best of my estimations and any other European history teacher that I've spoken to. Okay. So with that, if you're asking how to get the complexity point, don't worry. Just stop. Okay. Don't worry about it. Unless this is something that you know exactly what you're doing, don't try that, triple somersault to try to, get Obi-Wan, who has the high ground. All right. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, this has, I think the 8-point strategy, if you're looking to get a 4, I think it's a solid strategy. A-Push Corona classes will be on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1. So what I'm doing right now, what I'm trying to do is have a 1 o'clock broadcast. That's going to be every weekday, Mondays and Wednesdays, AP Euro, Tuesdays and Thursdays, AP US, and Fridays, AP Gov. Okay, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will be back on Wednesday and we will focus on the Enlightenment. Okay, so on Wednesday, we'll focus on the Enlightenment. Marco will be in touch with Marco Broadcast again. You want to make sure that you are subscribing to Marco Learning, because I know that I'm going to be doing some broadcasts on the Marco Learning channel. Okay, so that's going to be important that you're subscribed to that channel. I see some of you have gotten on there, so make sure that you are subscribed to Marco Learning. Check out some of the review videos that they've put out there. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and note here, let's see, so unit 3, let's see, let's see, these are US history. Let me go into the playlist. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up this playlist here, and you can see unit 4, scientific and philosophical developments. So I'm going to go ahead and post this video that y'all can go ahead and look at, where I'm giving an overview at the Marco Learning Studio. Okay, all right, so we're not going to worry about that. All right, so here are some links to the new Marco Learning study guides here, okay? So with that, we'll go ahead. We've got these things here, and make sure that to take a look at that new material for Marco Learning. I think that it's great stuff, and I think that you are going to, you're going to really appreciate this material, and make sure that you are, subscribing to the channel, because we are going to be doing some live broadcast. Okay, so from there, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be it for today. I will be back on Wednesday at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern, and we are going to talk about the Enlightenment. Bill of Rights Institute, that's A-Push, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. But as far as that goes, the Corona class, actually, I'm just sipping water today. Okay, so you can see here, just got water. There actually is something on the mug right now. Marco Learning is definitely always worth it. POV, Tom Ritchie, who works with Marco Learning. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all for a wonderful Corona class. Again, I will be back on Wednesday at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern, and it is always a pleasure.